Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakahakodash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the Brother Ra'aya with another video, and in this video, I'll be profiling an article from RT.com titled, EU Split Over Russia Revealed, and this is Daniel chapter 2 all day, with the iron toes mixed with miry clay having divisions amongst each other. And as we'll see in this article, a lot of these European Edomite nations have their hands up in the air over this Ukrainian situation dealing with Russia. You have some European Edomite nations that don't want to go as harshly on Russia due to them having lucrative political and economic ties with Russia. And you have others that want to be more stingent and more severe on Russia because they're cheerleading for the United States of America, which is egging them on to go against Russia. But what this is ultimately going to lead to is America's European allies turning against her at some point during this upcoming third woe, World War III, and allying themselves with Russia to altogether shoot 200 million nuclear missiles onto the United States of America, turning it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. But again, EU or European Union split over Russia revealed. However, and I'm not even going to attempt to say this person's name, so I'll just say Eminem noted that the bloc is united in agreement that Ukrainian sovereignty must be defended. Despite repeated warnings from the West in recent weeks over a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine, EU members are still divided over what sort of sanctions to impose on Moscow and over how much military aid to send to Kiev if an incursion takes place, Poland's prime minister has cautioned. In an interview with Spain's El Mundo newspaper on Sunday, Eminem emphasized that the bloc is united in agreement that Ukraine's sovereignty must be upheld, but said that there was still a difference of opinions in how to provide assistance to the Eastern European nation and on what measures to hit Russia with in response. All EU member states agree that Ukraine needs to maintain its sovereignty, he said. Disagreements concern the scale of sanctions on Russia and military assistance to Ukraine, which should be agreed by the Union or NATO. I don't expect Germany to get involved in the conflict, since it is the new government's decision, the PM continued, and Germany's got a lot of lucrative ties with Russia, especially the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which the U.S. has been constantly trying to hamper. Germany gets damn near 40% of its energy and natural gas from Russia, so you can see how they wouldn't want to be so gung-ho in going against Russia and severely hampering the needs of their population. But if they refuse to assist Ukraine, I will ask them to say it out loud. Evasive statements such as "we will not send weapons to Ukraine because it is a conflict zone" don't indicate a serious policy under the current circumstances. Last week, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told CNN that the EU was actively discussing possible sanctions against Russia. She rejected reports that some European leaders had given up on the toughest measures out of fears that the continent's energy security would suffer. She was asked about the likelihood of sanctions against the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which, once given the green light by Berlin's regulators, will link the gas fields of Siberia with consumers in Germany through the Baltic Sea. I want to be very clear, nothing is off the table. Everything is on the table, von der Leyen commented. That's it with this article. But as we can see, there's continuing divisions in the European Union. not just over Russia and this Ukrainian situation now, but it's been going on. And you saw a lot of it during Donald Trump's presidency when he was getting onto a lot of these European Union nations over them not covering what he believed they should cover with the costs of NATO. And then recently, what did you see with France? They were mad at the AUKUS deal, which the United States of America and the UK made with Australia, where the US would sell nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, which in turn caused Australia to cancel lucrative shipbuilding contracts that they already had with France. And then you had the president of Croatia saying that if a situation breaks out with Russia over Ukraine, you can pretty much count them out of getting involved. So there's divisions at damn near every level, and it's only going to get more apparent and worse as we get closer and closer to World War III kicking off. And like I said at the beginning of the video, at some point during World War III, America's allies are going to turn against her and ally themselves with Russia and her allies to shoot their nuclear missiles onto the United States of America. But now let's get into these prophecies dealing with the iron toes mixed with miry clay and the divisions we're seeing. This is Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 36. The interpretation, Babylon, the first kingdom, the ancient Babylonian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar. And this is the dream that Daniel interpreted, that King Nebuchadnezzar had. And this is talking about the kingdoms that would rule, the heathen kingdoms, before the kingdom of heaven under the true children of Israel, who are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, would be set up and established. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar, art a king of kings, for the power of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold on that statue of a man of gold, silver, brass, iron, and then the iron mixed with miry clay. And the ancient Babylonian Empire, as it says, was the head of gold, that lion that stood up like a man. And now we're going into the breasts and the arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, that bear that had 3 ribs in his mouth. And after these shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, the Medo-Persian Empire, and another third kingdom of brass, the Grecian Empire under the Edomites, began by Alexander the Great, that leopard with the 4 wings on his back, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And now we're getting into the legs of iron, that ancient pagan Roman Empire under the Edomites, or the so-called white people. As it says, Rome, and the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. And the Roman Empire was known for using iron-made weaponry and other iron-made military equipment that gave them a big advantage over their enemies at the time, who still heavily relied on brass-made weaponry. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And now we're getting into the last leg of this statue, the current heathen kingdom that we're living in right now before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven, which is also ruled by the biblical Edomites. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of, which began during the Renaissance. The kingdom shall be divided. And as we just read in that article, EU split or divided over the Russian situation dealing with Ukraine. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And that iron and clay goes into how some nations in this reincarnated Roman Empire are stronger than other nations. The iron can be considered the United States of America, Britain, France, Germany, and the part of clay, the weaker parts, can be considered nations like the pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. This reincarnated Roman Empire isn't as cohesive as the ancient Roman Empire was. And what's going to lead to this reincarnated Roman Empire being completely broken apart is the United States of America constantly pushing for war with other nations such as Russia, and these European nations being dragged in behind the United States of America and always feeling the blowback from American adventurism abroad. Just look at the Syrian civil war or the Libyan war. It was Europe that had to deal with the refugee crisis from it. And also, like I was mentioning earlier, you've got nations like Germany not wanting to go as rough against Russia because they don't want to mess up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And you've got nations like France mad at the United States of America over the AUKUS deal. And it's ultimately going to lead into the United States of America's European allies completely turning against her and allying themselves with Russia to, again, shoot those 200 million nuclear missiles onto this place. But now I'm going to jump to Daniel chapter 7, verse 19, talking about, again, the legs of iron, the pagan Roman Empire. Then I would know the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, because what were the Romans known for having? A senate, and they were a republic where they had senators discussing the bills and policies of the country, very similar to the United States of America today. They didn't have a traditional king like the kingdoms that came before it. Exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And now we're going into the reincarnated Roman Empire, those iron toes mixed with miry clay, beginning around the Renaissance, and the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, this little horn, speaking of the United States of America, and before whom 3 fell, and those 3 that fell is speaking of the original 3 main players in the so-called New World before the 13 colonies took over the rest of the landmass and became what you know as the United States of America today. And they were Britain, France, and Spain. Even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And when we go into the Merriam-Webster definition for the word stout, it reads brave, bold, firm, determined, obstinate, uncompromising. And we can see with this Ukrainian situation that the United States of America is bold, determined, obstinate, or not wanting to change their opinion, and uncompromising and wanting to foment a war with Russia, which a lot of these other European nations don't want to do because, again, they're on the front lines of a conflict of that nature, and they would be the ones to receive the main blowback from it. Sturdy, vigorous, staunch, enduring, forceful, a stout attack, violent, a stout wind. That little horn, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout, unwavering, bold, forceful, violent, arrogant than his fellows, America's European allies in the EU and NATO. And again, what this is ultimately going to lead to is during World War III, America's allies turning against her and allying themselves with Russia and her allies to altogether shoot those 200 million nuclear missiles onto this place. And now I'm going to close it out in Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns, speaking of the EU or European Union, beginning with the first 10 common markets of the EU, back when it was known as the European Economic Community, which thou sawest upon the beast, NATO, these shall hate the whore, the United States of America, the mother of harlots, mystery, Babylon the Great, the abomination of the nations, as you'll read earlier in this chapter, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire, nuclear fire, which is going to turn this place into the biblical lake of fire, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards that's going to stand as an eternal memorial as to what a wicked kingdom looked like, how not to govern the earth, and what the judgment and punishment was for afflicting the apple of the Most High's eye, the children of Israel, who were again the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Hey, just keep strong. As we can clearly see, these biblical prophecies are coming to place as we speak, and we're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.